It's 2009 in Tokyo, Japan. After the release of Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Game Freak moves on to a new project. The first 4 generations of Pokemon all released on brand new Nintendo consoles, each more powerful than the last, allowing the new games to upgrade the look of their graphics and the sound of their music. But Nintendo hasn't released a new console in a while, so this brand new game will have to be on the DS, just like Diamond and Pearl were. So the developers go, fine, we can't make the games look or sound any better. So instead, we're going to do something new, something fresh. We're going to create the greatest Pokemon game ever made. Pokemon as a franchise has always sold itself off of adventure. You get to the ripe old age of 10 or 12, get a pet, then head out into the world on a journey where you compete with others and pick up some more creatures along the way. It's a game series all about customization where you can play with any team you want, each Pokemon having 4 moves of your choosing. There's only one problem. Pokemon's never been great at handling the whole adventure aspect. People generally agree that the first 2 generations are the best at exploration, since you can do the gyms, the 8 difficult trials that you have to complete to finish the game, mostly out of order. But from there, the games only got more and more linear, forcing you onto a set path for the sake of story. And even if those stories could sometimes be interesting or charming, the downside was that it made you stick to a specific route through the game, which hurt the adventure. There's only one issue. This general opinion is wrong. It's actually the 5th games that handle exploration and player freedom the best, and in this video essay, I'm going to be explaining why. I'll be covering Black and White 2 a bit, but this is mostly going to be about the originals. Okay, so after that, I'm sure a lot of you are going to be a bit annoyed. How could these games, where you can't even do the gyms and routes out of order, be the best at player freedom? Well, it's simple. While it's true that Black and White is a very linear story, one that, just so you know, I won't be covering in this video, you actually have a ton of freedom in how you want to interact with the routes themselves. In every other Pokemon game, for the most part, the routes are straight lines that'll occasionally have a small path of water you can surf across for an item. For example, look at the first 4 routes of Sinnoh. Wow, look, this one is a pond. That's so cool. And there's a little cave in this one. I wonder what happens when I come back later with Surf. Oh nice, I got a single TM. Great. Now, even though I think these routes are aesthetically interesting, there's nothing really to find here. You don't have any choice in where you want to explore and which areas you want to skip, so you're forced to encounter pretty much everything in the whole section. I mean, you can go back to Orberg Gate with Surf and head down to get the Focus Punch TM, but the cave itself is really short and uninteresting, and there aren't any cool trainers or rare Pokemon or anything to get excited about. I'm just not particularly interested in exploring most of the routes in Sinnoh, because there's usually nothing to be interested in. There are exceptions, of course. I think the area under the bike path is awesome, but a lot of the game is just like this. Compare Sinnoh to the first 4 routes of Pokemon Black and White. The most boring by far is Route 2. You can come back with the Strength and Cut HMs to get some cool items, but it's really short, and other than that, there's really not much here. And then there's Route 3, which is this whole cave that the story brings you into very briefly just to show you it's there and how caves work. If you come back later with Surf, you can go into the depths and get a bunch of rewards, like 2 more TMs, which are reusable now, more on that later, and a Mystic Water. It's still kind of a boring cave, but it's a bit more interesting and expansive than Orberg Gate. Then there's this pond off the edge of the bridge. If you surf up there, you can fight this trainer who's pretty tough, and as a little extra reward, you get a rare candy and an HP up for straying off the beaten path. This is the 3rd route in the game, and there are 2 different nice but completely optional things you can check out. Then there's Route 4. This is a desert route, which is super unusual for an early point in the game. Normally you only get access to these after you've beaten 4 or 5 gyms at least, if the game even has one, so it being so early is pretty cool. It breaks up the grass areas that you've already gotten used to at this point with something new and unique. Now, you can only fully access it after getting your 3rd gym badge, but even before then, you can get a little taste of it and even catch a few Pokemon like a Darumaka, which might be really useful against the 3rd gym leader. Now, you can just go straight north, but if you want to, you can also head left, an area with tons of personality, hidden items, and it also gives you access to the desert resort. But the route that really takes the cake is number 1. It's very short and basic, but halfway between the only 2 grass patches, there's this little pool of water. Surf into it, and you get access to an entire massive new area, Routes 17 and 18. Route 17 is a maze of different currents, interspersed with swimmer trainers who you haven't really seen a lot of in this game. And then Route 18 is this cool little island with a bunch of powerful trainers and rare items. Plus, the ranger up in this house gives you a Larvesta egg, which hatches and then evolves into one of the coolest Pokemon in the game. So what am I getting at? Basically, while it's true that Black and White is more linear in story than a lot of Pokemon games, virtually every route has some sort of interesting side path that offers something unique compared to every other area of the game. There's Route 17 and 18 off of Route 1, the Greater Dream Yard, Wellspring Cave on Route 3, the massive side area just before Pinwheel Forest, the second path through Pinwheel Forest, and the legendary Pokemon hidden there. Basically all of Castelia City, which is massive by Pokemon standards and has several different giant skyscrapers you can search through, the Desert Resort and Relic Castle on Route 4, Lost Lorn Forest, Mistralton Cave on Route 6, the entire bottom floor of Chargestone Cave, and the Moor of Icarus on Route 8. And those are just the big optional ones you can access before beating the game. And since they're optional, while you can meticulously search through each of them, you can also just breeze right past them without any negative consequences. This is actual player choice, something that's really important for a game series based around customizing your adventure.
After all, there's so much to do, so much to see, so what's wrong with taking the back streets? You'll never know if you don't go. You'll never shine if you don't glow. Hey now, you're an all-star, get your game on, go play.
And while there's some of this in other Pokemon games, Unova easily takes the cake, just bursting at the seams with endless optional side areas. Also, just something I should mention, while I think that Black and White has way too many rival battles, they're spaced out much better if you go adventuring a lot. And that's not even talking about the post-game stuff. Here is a short list of the things you unlock in the post-game. 2 new cities, a super boss fight against Cynthia, champion of the Sinnoh region, White Forest or Black City depending on which version you have, the Abyssal Ruins where you can loot an ancient temple and sell the relics to a billionaire, huge numbers of classic Pokemon from the first 4 games, the ability to fish, allowing you to catch a ton of new Pokemon, the depths of Relic Castle, a second super boss fight against one of the game's developers, the Royal Unova Challenger's Cave. After you beat it, the 8th gym leader will teach you a powerful dragon type. Routes 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, the Abundant Shrine, the Giant Chasm which contains the legendary Pokemon Kyurem, the Village Bridge, a village built on top of a bridge, a plotline where you search for the 7 Sages of Team Plasma which disbanded after the events of the story, with the help of a familiar member of the International Police, and the battle against the 3rd super boss, Champion Alder, allowing you to finally officially become the best trainer in the entire Unova region. Black and White holds onto its nature as the most exploring heavy Pokemon game by having a frankly huge number of new, totally optional things available to you after you beat the main story. The stuff I just mentioned alone is like a third of a regular Pokemon game all on its own. And adding on to the flavor of the game is the season system. Basically, depending on which month you open the game, Unova will be in a different season of the year. Each of these 4 seasons changes something about the world. For example, it'll get dark earlier or later depending on the time of year, it'll rain in certain areas during spring, and the water in some places will freeze during winter, making it icy and harder to navigate. Some music changes too, like the summer theme for Undella Town, which is completely different to how it sounds the rest of the year, and routes 2, 4, 6, and 12, which all change tracks each season. Plus, one Pokemon, Sawsbuck, will look different every single month. The season doesn't change the gameplay a whole lot, but it adds so much to the vibes of the world. If you play through the story over a long enough course of time, you can see how long you've been on your journey everywhere around you, as the leaves turn orange and snow begins to fall. The mechanic never returned outside of Black and White's sequel, and the fan community almost universally agrees that was a mistake. And the music in Black and White is incredible. Since there weren't going to be any graphical or system upgrades and Pokemania was dying down, Game Freak went all out in giving this game an unforgettable soundtrack. All of the routes have their own unique tunes, each battle has a fitting piece going behind it. Hell, there's even a song for when you get down to the gym leader's last Pokemon, just to add to the stakes. Also, while a lot of generations kind of have their own musical vibes, Black and White doesn't. Hoenn uses a lot of grand trumpets, Sinnoh has dramatic piano, and Black and White has everything. It's maybe the most varied and creative soundtrack of any Pokemon game. The music's fantastic, but it would take way too long to talk about, so I'm not going to. Besides, there are other things worth talking about more. In the other Pokemon games, a lot of the NPCs, the people that populate the world, are just really weird and stupid and super naive. Basically, all of them will just spout nonsense whenever you talk to them, talking about how they like shorts because they're easy to wear, asking you for a quote but only letting you answer in 2 words, or how this guy will give you a watch if you talk to enough clowns. Just... it's dumb, and not in a fun way where it's self-aware about how ridiculous it is. It's just sort of sad and pathetic, because they think they're being funny, but they're just being confusing. It's not good. Some of the most famous examples of this problem are the human roadblocks, where people would just sort of stand in front of doorways and stop you from walking through them for ridiculous reasons. There are these folks in Kalos who stop you because of a power outage, despite it obviously not being true. This guy in Kanto who won't let you pass because he's too drunk, and these Psyduck in Sinnoh who won't get out of the friggin' road just because they have too bad of a headache. These roadblocks have always been bad and stupid and just make the world feel a lot less real. Like, at a certain point, these Psyduck are Pokemon. Why can't I just battle or catch them to get by? I have a level 40 grass type, and you're telling me a half dozen headache ducks are gonna pose a problem? This sort of thing just isn't present in original Black and White. The characters in this game are written with a certain level of maturity that isn't really present in the rest of the series. For example, all of the gym leaders feel like they have actual personalities. They chat with each other and they have their own passions and jobs outside of Pokemon stuff. They interact with the plot too, which makes sense considering they're canonically some of the most powerful trainers in the region. All of the human roadblocks make sense, like this guy who says they're finishing up some important construction and that you should go get the 3rd badge to kill some time. I think it really helps that the main character of this game is canonically older than all the other Pokemon protagonists. Every other game has 11 or 12-year-olds traipsing around the wilderness, stopping crime bosses and catching gobs, and I'm not the first to note how ridiculous that sounds. On the other hand, the main character of Black and White is 14, which isn't old, but it's a lot more reasonable. Like, 12 is a 7th grader, 14 is a high schooler. I could totally see some prodigy level 14-year-old becoming the best chess player in, I don't know, New York or something. And there's lots of little things, like how you can chat with this hiker in Lost Thorn Forest, and I'll talk about the difference in lifestyle he has with someone he knows. Or how after Team Plasma steals the dragon skull from Lenora's museum, all the people in the museum who saw it will have thoughts on what they're gonna do with it. When you walk into Cynthia's house in Undella Town, she's just going to relax on the beach. The trainer that most of the fans agree to be the most powerful and intimidating champion of all time is on vacation in a beach town. It's super humanizing. And the game can be genuinely intentionally funny sometimes, like how after Team Plasma steals one of Bianca's Pokemon, Iris forcibly volunteers to be Bianca's bodyguard, much to the distress of Bianca herself. Iris drags her across Castelia City for 20 straight minutes. It's hilarious. But I know what you're thinking. After all, I can read your mind. Wouldn't exploring completely destroy the difficulty curve of the game? Like you go off on your own for a bit, all your Pokemon get 6 levels stronger, and suddenly you're demolishing everything in your path, nothing able to meaningfully challenge you? And that's a valid question, but no. And that's because of a genius mechanical decision that made exploring actually worth it. In all the previous Pokemon generations, and Generation 6 and 9, you gain a fixed amount of experience for each Pokemon you defeat. You beat a level 40 Abomasnow, you're getting 1,834 XP. You beat a level 5 Poochyena, that's 58 XP. Now, this can work as a leveling method, since as you get more powerful, you'll need more and more experience to keep increasing in level. However, there's a problem. All of the gym leaders had to be balanced around players who decided not to explore because they would be too difficult otherwise. This meant that if you wanted to do one of the few optional side areas the game had, there was a good chance you would end up being way too powerful because of all the extra fights you won. And as a result, exploring too much would end up making all the parts of the game that are supposed to be difficult into a cakewalk, removing any sort of challenge and making it less fun. And if the gym leaders were instead balanced around the assumption that you did do the big optional side area, then they would be way too powerful for anyone who didn't, effectively forcing the player to either go somewhere they didn't want to go, or just run around and grind levels for hours. Black and White fixed this issue completely. In this game, the amount of EXP your Pokemon gains actually depends on its level. For example, let's say you're fighting level 20 Herdier in a trainer battle using your Duat, which is also level 20. If you beat it, you gain 781 experience points. That's a bit under 10% of the amount you need to gain a level, which isn't much, but it isn't nothing either. Now let's say you're 10 levels higher, level 30, but your opponent is the same. If that's true, you'll only gain 537 XP, and combined with the fact that it takes more experience to gain a level, you'll get basically nothing out of it. And this works in reverse too. If you're fighting a Herdier with a weak level 15 Oshawott and somehow manage to win, you'll get over 1,400 experience points, easily enough to gain an entire level and then some. So why is this a good thing? Well, there are 2 reasons. Number 1 is that it keeps your Pokemon at a mostly balanced level for story regardless of how many opponents you fight. You can absolutely still overlevel, but it's way harder to do so unintentionally. If you go exploring, you won't come back being way too strong, since once you get above the level of the Pokemon you're fighting, you'll start to gain way less XP. And if you decide to skip exploring, then you'll end up at a lower level, which means you'll get a ton of experience from the trainers in the gym before you reach the leader. By the time you do get to the leader, your Pokemon will be at the right level. And what this means is you can choose to either explore or not explore with no negative consequences either way. It also makes it really easy to raise weak Pokemon to a high level. Every time I play through Black and White, I pick up the Larvesta egg and hatch it into a level 1 Pokemon. Then I slap the EXP share on it, fight one battle against 3 Pokemon, and suddenly the Larvesta is up like 30 levels. It's really nice. Number 2 is that it forces you to use more than one Pokemon. See, in every Pokemon game, you can have up to 6 pocket monsters that you use in your party at a time. Filling out a full team of 6 is pretty much universally agreed to be the most fun way to play these games, since it lets you use a bunch of different cool creatures, and they can cover each other's weaknesses in ways that a team of 2 or 3 just couldn't. There's just one problem. Pokemon's always been really terrible at explaining to the player that this is a good idea. You have the catching tutorials at the start of the game, but those just explain how to catch a Pokemon, not why you should want to. So a lot of first-time players will pick up their starter and go through the whole game using just that, only picking up other Pokemon for the required HMs. The first Pokemon game I ever played was Emerald. Now, I love that game too. In fact, it's my second favorite Pokemon game after Black and White and its sequel. But the first time I went through it, I only really used a single Pokemon, my starter, Sceptile. I picked up some others for required HMs, but that was the only one I ever really used in battle. For most of the game, this strategy worked great, but I hit a wall when I got to the Pokemon League. I had to go up against 4 of the most formidable characters in the game in a row, and then the champion all in one sitting. But I couldn't. My Sceptile was level 70, but even then, it just wasn't strong enough for me to beat the game. I grinded for hours on the level 40 Pokemon in Victory Road, clawing my way to getting a level 82 Sceptile, but eventually I just gave up. I could get past Sydney and Phoebe pretty reliably, but Glacia's 5 ice types could all do a quarter or third of my health with just one move. I could only use Leaf Blade so many times, and Absorb, because yes, I still had that, just wasn't gonna cut it. And after that, I had to fight Drake, and all of his Pokemon resisted grass moves. And Pound, because I still had that too, would maybe KO his Salamence in 7 hits. And his Flamethrower could burn up Sceptile in just 3. And even if I got through all of that, I still had to fight Wallace. And even though I had the type advantage, half of his team still had ice moves that would decimate my poor grass-type lizard. Eventually, even little 7-year-old me realized that I just needed more team members, but it was too late. My second strongest Pokemon was a level 19 Tailo, and I was never going to be able to get it up to the level 60 or so it would need to help me out. So I gave up, and I never beat the game. Emerald didn't make me catch Pokemon for anything other than the required HMs, so I never did. But then I picked up Pokemon Black and White, and something magical happened. I hit a wall again, but this time it was on Gym 1. I couldn't just level up my Dewott, it was gaining levels so slow, and I just could not get past Silent's second Pokemon. His Pansage had powerful, super effective moves, and it was getting harder and harder to level up. So out of desperation, I picked up the Pansear that one NPC gives you and leveled it up a bit, and I got Lillipup for good measure. Silent was a piece of cake, and I never looked back. It took me dozens of hours playing Emerald to discover something about strategy that Black and White taught me in 30 minutes. Black and White forced me to learn about strength in numbers, and that using more than one Pokemon is just a lot more fun. I believe we professional game critics call this play conditioning. Now that I'm older and better at strategizing, I can appreciate the difficulty of trying to go through a game with just one Pokemon. But because of the way older Pokemon games worked, me and thousands, maybe millions of other first-time kids like me went through the game the hard way. I'm happy that Black and White conditions people out of that, because being able to use other creatures opens you up to a whole new world of choice and customization in the game, so you can really make it your adventure. You catch and use Pokemon because you think they're cool, or cute, or something you've never seen before, not just because you need something to use HMs. And it makes you want to explore too, since you want to find cool and adorable Pokemon that you can use on your team. Black and White doesn't just give you options, it actively teaches you how to use them. And speaking of HMs, there are a few other mechanical changes I want to talk about. What happened to HMs? The notoriously hated mechanic that forced you to permanently stick an otherwise useless move onto one of your Pokemon just so you could progress through the story? Yeah, Black and White basically completely removed those. Seriously. First of all, you only need to use a hidden machine exactly once in the entire game, One cut on this tree blocking access to the dream yard right after you beat the first gym. You can catch a gerbil, teach a cut, use it once, and then toss it away forever. You will never need to use that hidden machine again, or any other. All of the other HMs, Surf, Strength, Fly, Waterfall, and Dive, are never required for any part of the game. You can use them to find cool items, locations, and Pokemon, but if you don't want to, you never have to. And what's extra nice is that, other than Dive, all of these are actually useful moves. And Dive is literally only used in one location with no Pokemon, and it's one of the coolest parts of the whole game. And since it can learn Cut, Superior is the only non-water type starter that can solo run a Pokemon game, which makes me really happy since it's my favorite Pokemon. If this video gets to 2,000 likes, I'll make a video where I go through the whole game with just my beloved Smug Grass Stink. And on top of that, you're no longer required to have certain badges to use your HMs. You never get Strength and realize you don't have the 4th gym badge yet, so you can't actually use it. In Black and White, it doesn't matter how many badges you have. If you have a hidden machine, it'll work. This is a genius move. HMs are one of the worst things about the first 4 generations. They take up a huge portion of the few valuable moves your team has, and half of them are useless. Now you only have to use a single one time, and you're good. And now that I've talked about hidden machines, it's time to talk about TMs, or the technical machines. When the first games, Red and Blue, came out, they kind of had a resource management aspect to them. For example, your bag could only hold so many items, and if you had more than 20 different types of item, your bag would fill up, you couldn't carry any more things, and you would have to store them in your PC. Now, back then there also weren't as many things worth carrying, since it was before the days of held items and berries, but your bag would still fill up pretty fast. You had to decide what was valuable enough to haul around, what you could use, and what you just had to toss or sell. And TMs were a part of this. Every now and then, you'd find a little CD that could teach one of your Pokemon a rare special move, something powerful like Brick Break or Earthquake, but not so fast. You're only going to get one of these each game. You'll only ever be able to teach one Pokemon Earthquake, so use it wisely. This worked back in the day when Pokemon was simpler. You get your Pokemon, beat the first 8 gyms, defeat the champion, catch Mewtwo, complete the Pokedex, and you're done. That was it for Red and Blue. But starting in generations 2, 3, and 4, the game started to get a lot longer. It still took about the same amount of time to actually beat the game, but there's so much more to do after that. You could complete the battle frontier, explore new areas you'd never been able to see before, encounter tons of legendary Pokemon, catch super rare shinies, and so much more. If you wanted to finish the national dex, you no longer had to catch 120 or 130 new Pokemon, you had to get more like 350. And with classic Pokemon fans getting older and it getting easier to battle against other real people, even adding online matches in the Generation 4 games, Pokemon started to form a competitive scene, where you could train up a team powerful enough to beat down your friends, and maybe even go to regionals. And this led to a problem. See, if you wanted to use a powerful move like Shadow Ball or Overheat, there was usually still only one of those per game. Throughout your entire time playing, you could give exactly one of your Pokemon one of those moves, and that was it. This wasn't a huge issue back in the Generation 1 games, since even if you made a mistake, you'd only have to deal with it until you beat the champion and maybe completed the national dex. Now, if you made the same mistake in Pokemon Platinum, it would reverberate through your game forever. If you taught your camera up to Earthquake, that meant you could never give it to the Metagross you found later, or that awesome shiny you found, or to that new cool Pokemon that you didn't even realize existed at the time. And if you wanted to make a competitive team, well, that was going to be a problem, since Earthquake was a fantastic move in competitive, and you put it on a mediocre Camerupt who wasn't even that good, and are you starting to see the issue? The games were getting longer with more and more stuff to do, but very useful TMs like Earthquake and Rain Dance were still single use. You could only find them once in each save file. You'd be too scared to use the very useful technical machine for fear of regret, so you just never did, and it sat at the bottom of your bag, collecting dust. Black and White, once again, completely fixed this issue. It was the first game to allow you to reuse TMs. Basically, you could use them as many times as you wanted. This changed the role of TMs. Instead of being an outdated one-time resource management item, they became a permanent upgrade to your arsenal, another tool that you could use on your path to becoming the very best, like no one ever was. They became rarer, but also way more valuable, and something you could actually feel comfortable using. This gave the player back the choice that they gradually lost over the first 4 generations. They can freely mix and match the moves on their Pokemon again, without fear of regret. I mean, you still might delete a useful level up move, but don't worry, this game also has a move reminder, so even though it might be a bit of a pain, you can always get it back. And that's what really makes a lot of Black and White special. It's the choices you get while playing the game. They cut out a restriction that was limiting your choice and replaced it with a new system that was far more interesting. So you might be thinking, well, Haze, you Nimrod, you buffoon, all that is well and good, but you still can't do the gyms out of order. You're still forced to play through Black and White along a set path. So there actually isn't any good player choice, you utter moron. Well, my friend, now it's time to talk about why being able to do all the gyms out of order is virtually pointless. So when the first generation of Pokemon came out, they gave you a choice. Once you beat the first 2 gym leaders, you could then go on to challenge the next 5 in any order you wanted, so long as you fought Koga before Blaine. This was a pretty cool feature for a game that released in the late 90s. You could fight over half the normal bosses in the game whenever you felt like it. There was only one problem. Why would you ever want to do that? Aside from novelty, there's no point. It has no story implications. Team Rocket's plan is going to play out the same way regardless of how you go through the game. And what's the point in skipping them? If you want to get to Koga's gym, you're required to go to the SSN in Vermilion City and the Rocket Hideout in Celadon, and Surge and Erica's gyms are right there in town. If this was a branching paths thing, where you can choose which story events to go to first, like you could rescue Mr. Fuji from the Pokemon Tower or take down Team Rocket and Silphco before you did the hideout, it would be really cool. But since there's only one story path and you're forced to go to the towns of the 3rd and 4th gym leader before you can reach the 5th one, there's absolutely no reason to ever actually skip gyms. Plus, since the gym leaders don't scale in difficulty depending on how many badges you have, if you end up skipping Surge and Erica, by the time you get back to them, they'll be pathetically easy and it won't be fun anymore. And none of the remakes to these games fixed this. Now, I'm disappointed the Gen 5 games are linear too. But the truth is, the first 2 generations weren't any better. The stories will play out in the same order no matter where you go or who you talk to, and there's no functional benefit for doing the gyms out of order. It's a linear game pretending to give you choices. And not only are the stories of those games linear, the routes are too. All of the paths through the game are so cramped. You only get one choice walking down a route. Walk down the specific path with these trainers and these Pokemon, and if you ever try to leave it, all you'll find is a tree line you can't pass through, hiding nothing behind it. Once you get through them the first time, you'll never want to go back to Rock Tunnel or Diglett's Cave, because you know that ultimately they're just big brown holes in the ground with nothing noteworthy inside. And the same thing is true for every other route in Kanto, which makes it feel really weirdly empty. Black and White, meanwhile, has a special energy to it, a feeling that I've never seen any other Pokemon game replicate, that the rest of the world exists for a reason other than the sake of the player. You can witness a breakup, find people training in seclusion, and walk in on a bunch of folks just doing their office job. All things that, despite you completely missing them, would be happening in the world anyway. You can find all sorts of Pokemon off the beaten path, hidden in plain sight. They don't need you to interact with them for their lives, their hopes and dreams to be important to the game, and the Unova region would exist regardless of your interaction with it. But it's fascinating. So you want to talk to the folks in Anvil Town and on Route 18, to meet Cynthia while she's on vacation, and to just explore the wilderness while music plays in the background. Black and White has a weird layer of maturity to it that I don't think is really present in the other games. The knowledge that there's a world out there besides your own little bubble. And it's an interesting world, and one you should take the time to explore on your own time, at your own pace, exactly how you want to. And the sequel, Black and White 2, only improves on this feeling. You can see how the world has changed 2 years after the events of the first game. People are moving on with their lives, but things are different in ways that are sometimes obvious, sometimes subtle. Your two friends from the start are now a gym leader and the professor's assistant and haven't talked in 2 years. There are parts of the region you've never seen before, but they're still interconnected with the old stuff. A lot of them still existed, they just weren't places you could go the first time. The antagonists from the old game have split in 2, a difference in ideology breaking them apart. Tons of new Pokemon have been showing up. There's a whole new startup town in the desert from the first game, and there's a tournament in Driftvale City where powerful trainers from all over the world show up to claim the title of best in the world. It's a reminder that the rest of the world of Pokemon exists, and that the people in that world sometimes change without any input from you. This is what I've really been trying to get at for this whole video. This energy, it's the spirit of adventure and choice that Pokemon has always tried to sell itself on, that it never quite achieved. But Black and White and Black and White 2 are the games where they got the closest. Wow, that was pretentious, even for me, but I still think it's true. There's just more to Unova than any of the other regions. A lot of Pokemon games can come across as kind of shallow, but Black and White never does, and I think that's something really unique in the series. That was my video about the thing Black and White does better than any other Pokemon game. I hope you liked it. Thank you, goodbye, and I'll see you sometime in the future.